This is a recap on Get Out. In the initial scene, a youthful person of color named Andre is strolling alone around evening time through an impeccably manicured rural road. A little game's vehicle pulls up and begins gradually following him. Andre gets frightened and takes a different path to energetically stroll back the manner in which he came. At the point when he goes to see what the vehicle did, he sees it's left where it was, however the entryway is open. Suddenly, a man in a middle-aged protective cap assaults Andre, renders him oblivious, and hauls his body to the vehicle. Rose shows up at her picture-taker Beau Chris loft with baked goods and espresso. They're preparing to disappear for the end of the week to visit her family, and he's worried that they don't have a clue about she's dating a person of color. She guarantees him that, while they will probably express a few idiotic things, they are staggeringly moderate. Her father would have even decided in favor of Obama a third time on the off chance that he could have. Chris inquires as to whether he's the main individual of color she's always dated, and she says he is. However, she's sure that her folks will be absolutely cool. On the ride to her folks' home, Chris goes for a cigarette, yet Rose takes it and tosses it through the window. Advance notice that her folks would detest that she dates a smoker. Chris calls his mate Paul, a TSA specialist at the neighborhood air terminal, and helps him to take care to remember his canine and not to take care of him individual's food. Paul, opposing Chris dating a white lady, scolds him and says visiting the white society is a poorly conceived notion. He likewise plays a piece with endlessly. Rose believes it's sweet when Chris gets a piece desirous. While they're somewhere down in discussion and not completely focusing out and about, a deer darts out before the vehicle and is hit. They head over to research and call the police, who ask what they're doing nearby. Rose lets them know that they're visiting her family who live close by. The official requests to see Chris' ID, however Rose strides in and says that since he wasn't getting there's no requirement for that. The official lets them go, and Chris tells Rose that it was hot the manner in which she supported him against the bigoted cop. Chris and Rose show up at her folks' home. Her dad, Dignitary Armitage, is a friendly neurosurgeon who, indeed, lets Chris know that he would have decided in favor of Obama a third time in the event that he could have. Her mom, Missy, is an oddly chilly hypnotist. She offers to fix Chris of his nicotine compulsion through entrancing, yet he doesn't feel cool with individuals tooling around in his mind. The Armitages likewise have two on-location dark assistants, Walter, the maintenance man, and Georgina, the servant maid. Dignitary recognizes that it looks terrible, two well-off white individuals having two partners who are dark. However, they were employed to deal with his folks, and senior member would have felt awful letting them go. Something doesn't add up about both Walter and Georgina. They have an unequivocal firm step-forward counterfeit neighborliness about them. They additionally both talk utilizing dated vernacular. Dignitary provides Chris with a visit through the house and shows him old family photographs. Senior member guarantees that his dad was a track sprinter who was beat down by Jesse Owens to contend in the 1936 Olympics before Hitler. And keeping in mind that that was miserable for his father, it was as yet perfect to have Hitler's Aryan optimism disproved. There are likewise photographs of Rose's sibling who will go along with them later. The family gets together for evening tea. Missy mixes her tea and softly taps her spoon against the teacup multiple times. Missy gets some information about Chris' folks. Chris claims that his dad left when he was youthful and his mom passed on subsequent to being hit by a vehicle when he was 11. Georgina kind of short-circuits while pouring tea, and Missy advises her to go rest and get some rest. The Armitages tell Rose that they're hosting their large gathering tomorrow. She's astounded and they advise her that it's that very day consistently. Rose's sibling Jeremy shows up. He's a forceful, ruined rich youngster. That evening at supper, an alcoholic Jeremy begins conversing with Chris about MMA battling, saying that Chris would be a characteristic it becomes he comes from good stock. He needs to fight, yet Chris says that he has rules about play battling with alcoholics. Senior member and Missy advise Jeremy that perhaps it's the ideal opportunity for him to hit the hay. Chris and Rose resign to their room where she is sorry for her family and they nod off. Around midnight, Chris gets up and chooses to escape for a cigarette. While outside, he sees something somewhere far off charging at him. It's Walter. He goes directly toward Chris, yet makes a sharp turn without a second to spare and runs off toward another path. Inside the house, Georgina is gazing through a window. It turns out she's seeing her own appearance, not Chris. Before Chris can return to his room, Missy frightens him by turning on a light. She says smoking is a negative behavior pattern and offers again to assist him with stopping. He sits, however, derides the thought of hypnotism, uninformed that she is gradually mesmerizing him, involving her teaspoon as a center item. She returns him to the night his mother kicked the bucket when he was 11, and he tells her that his mom didn't get back home from work and he was excessively frightened to do anything. Similar to call the police, that would make it genuine, so he recently sat sitting in front of the television, apprehensively digging his nails into his bedposts. She taps her teacup with her spoon multiple times and advises him to sink. 11-year-old Chris sinks into his bed, while present-day Chris sinks into obscurity, seeing himself and Missy far above. His awareness has left his body, which is deadened in the seat. He wakes in the first part of the day and actually looks at his telephone. The Armitage's rich companions show up for the large party. For the most part, more seasoned white individuals direct numerous unseemly sentiments toward Chris, how he has a decent form. Since Tiger Woods hits the fairway, he should have a decent swing as well. Are people of color better in bed? And so on. Chris sneaks off and finds a visually impaired man named Jim Hudson who says that everyone individuals at the party are uninformed. Jim says that he loved Chris' work. He perceives the incongruity of a visually impaired workmanship vendor, however lets him know that he has a great right hand who is perfect at depicting pieces. Jim says that he personally attempted photography, however was never excellent at it. At the point when Chris returns to blending with the visitors, he finds another person of color. He's about Chris' age and Chris attempts to bond with him, yet he also is solid and unnatural like Walter and Georgina. In any case, something about him appears to be natural to Chris. Chris chooses to check in with Barr once more, and he finds his telephone turned off once more. He connects it, calls Barr, and lets him know all that has been going on. Pohl cautions him that white individuals love to have intercourse slaves, and he really wants to leave. Rose finds Chris, and he tells her how peculiar everything is, and that his telephone was turned off once more. She lets him know he's simply being jumpy on the grounds what is going on. Barr advises Chris to snap a photo of the person of color, and he will check whether he recollects that him. As Chris is going to leave, he's impeded by Georgina, who apologizes for turning off his phone. She lifted it up while tidying the end table, and when it came turned off she would have rather not played with it further. She gets very peculiar and lets out a solitary tear while letting him know that the Armitages deal with her like family. Chris and Rose take a walk and Chris tells her that he's certain he perceived the fellow and that something peculiar is certainly going on. She concurs by saying that it didn't appear to be a seizure by any stretch of the imagination. Chris says that he truly preferred to return home at this point. Back at the house, senior member is holding a quiet closeout with his visitors, who hold up bingo cards to offer. Close to him is an image of Chris. Jim Hudson wins the sale. Different visitors generally return home. Chris goes to pack his effects and gets a call from Barr, who lets him know that the person in the image is a person they knew named Dre, who used to work at a cinema however disappeared half a month prior. Chris sees that the storage room entryway is open. He glimpses inside and finds a container loaded up with photographs of Rose presented sincerely with numerous other people of color. There are likewise photographs of her with both Walter and Georgina, who don't in any way, shape, or form look like the mechanical adaptations Chris has met. Rose returns and Chris says that he really wants the keys to place their packs in the vehicle. She searches for them in a tote as they advance out of the house. Unexpectedly, Jerem, blocking the front door. Dean and Missy are there too. Jeremy is ready to attack, but Missy and Dean tell him to calm down. Chris keeps telling Rose to get the keys. Chris asks for the keys again and Rose says, very calmly, "You know I can't give you the keys." Chris finally realizes that Rose too is in on whatever this is. Dean yells and Missy clinks the teaspoon on her glass, causing Chris to sink back into the dark void again. He looks up the picture of the guy in the photo and sees that he went missing some time ago, so he goes to the police. He tells a female officer that his boy was kidnapped by white folk to be a sex slave just like the missing guy in the picture. She calls in 2 more officers to listen to Rod's story. When he finishes, they all burst out laughing. Nobody will take him seriously. Chris wakes up to find himself strapped to a chair in front of a mounted deer head and an old TV set. He watches a video made by Dean's father that talks about immortality, etc. Chris sees that his fingernails have clawed through the leather arm of the chair and exposed the padding. The teacup and spoon appear on the screen again. Ting ting ting, and he's out. Rod tries Chris's phone again and Rose answers. She lies by saying that Chris left 2 days ago and she's concerned about his whereabouts too. She claims that he left in a taxi or maybe an Uber. Rod tells her that he went to the police and she seems concerned. He starts to realize that something is wrong, so he tries to record the call, but when he starts talking to her again, she tells him she knows he has the hots for her. He tells her she's a crazy bitch and hangs up. Chris wakes up and Jim Hudson is on the screen. He tells Chris that they're going to swap brains. The other people at the party were all about being black, but Jim couldn't give less of a shit about that. What he really wants is to be able to see the world through Chris's eyes. He will continue existing in a dark void, but will be able to continue on as sort of a passenger. The flashing is an unfortunate side effect as they saw earlier at the party. Ting 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 of the teaspoon and Chris is out again. Dean tells Jeremy to go get Chris. He takes off his restraints and gets an IV ready. Chris wasn't unconscious after all. He'd stuffed padding from the chair in his ears to block the sound of the teaspoon. He knocks out Jeremy. Dean calls for Jeremy and goes out of the lab area to look for him. Chris rushes him and impales him with the deer antlers from the other room. Rose has earbuds in and isn't aware any of this is going on. While she listens to music, she is Googling images of handsome-looking black men with good physiques. Chris goes upstairs and finds Missy. She goes for the teacup and spoon, but Chris beats her to them and smashes the cup. Instead, she attacks him with a knife, but he turns it on her and stabs her to death. Chris goes for the front door again, but Jeremy has returned and puts him in a chokehold. Twice Chris struggles to pull open the front door, but Jeremy kicks it shut. On the third try, as Jeremy kicks the door, Chris stabs him in the leg and breaks his skull with brutal head stomps. He runs outside and gets into Jeremy's car. He starts down the driveway but hits Georgina. He can't just let her lie there like he did his mom, so he gets her in the car and continues down the driveway. She wakes up and attacks him. They crash into a tree and she dies. Suddenly, the rearview mirror is blown away. From out of nowhere, Walter runs past Rose in pursuit of Chris, and Rose says, "Get him, Grandpa," as he tackles Chris. They wrestle on the ground, and Chris takes his picture. Walter turns and asks Rose for her rifle, and he shoots her in the stomach. She tries to reach for the rifle, but Chris bats it away. Chris starts to choke Rose, but stops. He can't go through with it. Rose calls weakly for help, knowing the local police will throw Chris in jail, but it's Rod stepping out of the police car. Chris gets into the car. Rod looks at the chaos and says, "Man, I told you not to go in that house."